Can start already. Yeah, hello me.
Of icapital.biz Berhad.
It is slightly different from those AGM that I have attended. I, in a sense, received a lot of information as well as insightful knowledge on stock exchange. Every AGM will highlight a lot of new things for us to learn.
The managing director actually shared not only the company performance, but also the insightful, the research that have been done by himself and the team.
By Teng.
Sorry, cannot. Next
He explains in great detail management style that make me understand his investment philosophy more. But throughout it all, there's a consistency, like discipline. Like people say, oh, why he didn't go in, the market went up. It's not about the market going up. It's whether the company is at a good price, has good management, has a good service.
Everything delete.
It's the 3 I's that they promoted: integrity, independence, and intelligence.
I believe Mr. Tan really have that heart, to really want to make life better for people.
The most important thing is I don't lose money for investors, and you begin to appreciate why Buffett tells you don't lose money. And then don't forget that first rule. We have even given the example of buying a piece of empty land versus buying a shop house. If you want regular income with some appreciation, you buy a shop house with income and then you get capital appreciation. But if you want pure capital appreciation, then you just buy a piece of empty land, like what Selangor Properties did 60 years ago, and allow the value to be unlocked and allow the long-term capital appreciation to materialize. So that is icapital.biz Berhad. That is the vehicle that we launched and promoted in 13 years ago.
Bye.
icapital.biz meet my investment objective, which is long term, and I know that my hard-earned money is in the hands of a trusted, experienced fund manager.
The second part is the philosophy that this fund represents.
Value investing, especially Mr. Tan. It's not just about investing, growing your wealth per se, but I learned a lot about life from investing. If you really want an investment which is worry-free and almost you can sleep well at night, this is one investment I normally recommend my friends because I feel that there is no risk.
We give you one simple promise that whatever we do will be done with integrity, and 13 years later, I will still deliver the same thing to you. On that, people believe in us and invested $250 million in icapital.biz Berhad. I'm here today standing in the Tunku Abdul Rahman Memorial. For those of you who are not familiar with Tunku Abdul Rahman, he was the first Prime Minister of Malaysia. I was born in those generations where we live in a country where civil liberties pretty much more or less guaranteed. And you have a Prime Minister at a time who, well, he has never hide the fact. Everyone in Malaysia knows that Tunku Abdul Rahman loves to play poker, drinks whiskey, like horse racing. So you have a country where all these are accepted even though he's the Prime Minister, and it goes down all the way to the level of the ordinary Malaysian. We have two elections, state elections coming. Even though they're state elections, they have national consequences. The question that many Malaysians are asking, what next? What happens after that? Even though a certain political coalition may win, then people will jump to another party, then you get the kind of instability all over again. So will this continue? Will we be able to finally see some solution to the prolonged uncertainty that the country has been facing? On the 4th and 5th December, the two talks, we will explore these issues. These are not simple issues, but the fact that they're not simple issues do not mean that they do not concern you, that they do not concern the future of your family and the future generations. They will affect them severely. So if you would like to have a talk that will address these issues in a frank, objective, non-political manner, together with economic aspects of it, then come and listen. And then join us in a lively Q&A session.
If I want to adjust the
So
screen,
remember,
I go to here, right?
Malaysia used to be what was like where Tunku Abdul Rahman, as a Prime Minister,
If I want to adjust
was
the screen,
able
I'm supposed to go to here.
admit
Oh,
openly that he loves to have a round of poker every now and then,
This is bad.
drinks whiskey,
Oh, this
to a
is
situation now where even the word Tima can create a lot of controversy. Is that where we're heading? And more importantly, what is next for Malaysia?
Let's have lesser viewer.
It's fine.
Yeah, please so.
At least it's one kind of recording. It will stay here.
Good afternoon, all of you. Sorry for the delay. Our event will begin soon. We have posted some poll questions. Please share with us your feedbacks by taking part in the poll, and Mr. Tan will share the poll results later. In the meantime, please bear with us while we are waiting for other participants to join us. Thank you for your patience. This meeting is also streaming on our Facebook and YouTube channels. To those of you who are joining us from Facebook and YouTube, welcome. We are happy to announce that Capital Dynamics will be organizing various events in this December. Come and join us. On 4th and 5th December, we are having a virtual conference on Malaysia's economic and stock market outlook. Is there a hope for Malaysia? On 4th December, it is an English session, and on 5th December, it's a Mandarin session. Hope to see you there.
Oh,
Now,
shit.
let us firstly now welcome Ms. Tam Man Lin, Deputy CEO of Capital Dynamics. Our event will start shortly. Thank you for your patience.
It is slightly different from those AGM that I have attended. Right? In a sense, I received a lot of information as well as insightful knowledge
on stock exchange, every AGM will highlight a lot of new things for us to learn.
The managing director actually shared not only the company performance, but also the insightful, the research that have been done by himself and the team.
He explains in great detail management style that make me understand his investment philosophy more. But throughout it all, there's a consistency, like discipline. Like people say, oh, why he didn't go in, the market went up. It's not about the market going up. It's whether the company is at a good price, has good management, has a good service.
It's the 3 I's that they promoted: integrity, independence, and intelligence.
I believe Mr. Tan really have that heart, to really want to make life better for people.
The most important thing is I don't lose money for investors. And you begin to appreciate why Buffett tells you don't lose money. And then don't forget that first rule. We have even given the example of buying a piece of empty land versus buying a shop house. If you want regular income with some appreciation, you buy a shop house with income and then you get capital appreciation. But if you want pure capital appreciation, then you just buy a piece of empty land, like what Selangor Properties did 60 years ago, and allow the value to be unlocked and allow the long-term capital appreciation to materialize. So that is icapital.biz Berhad. That is the vehicle that we launched and promoted in 13 years ago.
icapital.biz meet my investment objective, which is long-term, and I know that my hard-earned money is in the hands of a trusted, experienced fund manager.
The second part is the philosophy that this fund represents.
Value investing, especially Mr. Tan. It's not just about investing, growing your wealth per se, but I learned a lot about life from investing. If you really want an investment which is worry-free and almost you can sleep well at night, this is one investment I normally recommend my friends because I feel that there is no risk.
We give you one simple promise that whatever we do will be done with integrity, and 13 years later, I will still deliver the same thing to you. On that, people believe in us and invested $250 million in icapital.biz Berhad.
You go first, is it?
Hello everyone, thanks for your patience. Our event will start shortly. Let me give a short introduction of myself. My name is Wai Ying, the MC of the day. It is my humble pleasure in welcoming all of you to this special address by Teng in conjunction with the 17th Annual General Meeting of icapital.biz Berhad. The duration of this meeting is expected to last for 2 to 3 hours, including the Q&A session. As mentioned earlier, we have posted some poll questions. Please share with us your feedbacks by taking part in the poll, and Mr. Tan will share the poll results later. Now, I will first run through briefly the outline of today's program with all of you before moving on to some housekeeping rules. The event will start at 2:50, followed by a 15-minute short break, estimated at 3:30 p.m. A gentle reminder for you, please do not log out from the Zoom meeting during the break time. We will resume with a Q&A session after the virtual break at 4 p.m. The event is expected to end around 5 p.m. Now, we shall move on to the housekeeping rules. Kindly be informed that all participants joining this meeting, other than the speakers, will be muted throughout the whole session. All participants are reminded to have your video switched on throughout the duration of the meeting. This is for security purposes and to ensure all of you have proper engagement with the meeting. Participants are kindly reminded that Capital Dynamics reserves the right to remove any participants who refuses to enable video access. Any personal recording and sharing of the recording of the meeting by participants is strictly prohibited. To all of you, if any of you have any questions that you may wish to ask our speaker throughout the meeting, please feel free to drop your questions via the chat function. Please be informed that all questions must be directed to the Q&A team. Any questions that are directed elsewhere will not be addressed. Dear participants, if at any point of time you require technical support, kindly contact our customer support team at the contact details listed at the bottom of this slide. Next, you may choose the view to view the meeting with the presenter view as shown in this slide. Let us firstly now welcome Ms. Taman Lin, Deputy CEO of Capital Dynamics, to share more about the new funds.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I hope you all have taken a quick lunch. I'm not sure whether all of you were present at the AGM this morning with us. If you are, can you see the reaction button at the bottom right? There's a smiley face with the reaction button. Just give us a thumbs up if you were there with us at the AGM. And we hope that you have enjoyed yourself at the AGM. And it's a pity because it's been 2 years that we can't see each other at the usual physical AGM that we used to interact, over coffee, lunch, and all that. So if you all have the time as well, you can also go to check out Mr. Tan's personal Instagram, because we also posted photos of him getting ready for the AGM this morning. And just a quick announcement, on behalf of Capital Dynamics Australia Limited, we are launching our new fund, iCapital Asia Pacific ex-Japan BTB Fund. This fund, it's an income fund. The primary objective is to generate income for investors, and such because of that, the management fee is fixed at just 0.5125%. We have started the initial offering period, and the initial offering period will run all the way till 14th of January 2022. During this IOP period, all the units will be issued at Aussie dollar $1.
Using land also.
And the minimum investment is just 5,000 AUD. The fund documents, if you're interested, you can visit our Australia website, www.capitaldynamics.com.au. You can download the documents. And for investors that need our assistance, we will also be having our roadshow starting from 6th of December. We'll be visiting the various cities as well as having the virtual roadshows. We will be talking about the fund in detail. You can sign up for the roadshow at events.icapital.biz. And we have also launched our investor portal. So for those who do not want to come to our office, you can also open an investment account with our Australian office and subscribe for this fund online. And then the next is just to recap, the website where you can sign up for the roadshow is events.icapital.biz. We hope to see you all there at the event. With that, I'll pass over to Teng.
It is slightly different from those AGM that I have attended. Right? In a sense, I receive a lot of information as well as insightful knowledge on stock exchange. Every AGM will highlight a lot of new things for us to learn.
The managing director actually shared not only the company performance, but also the insightful, the research that have been done by himself and the team.
He explains in great detail management style that make me understand his investment philosophy more. But throughout it all, there's a consistency, like discipline. Like people say, oh, why he didn't go in, the market went up. It's not about the market going up. It's whether the company is at a good price, has good management, has a good service.
It's the 3 I's that they promoted: integrity, independence, and intelligence.
I believe Mr. Tan really have that heart, to really want to make life better for people.
The most important thing is I don't lose money for investors. And you begin to appreciate why Buffett tells you don't lose money. And then don't forget that first rule. We have even given the example of buying a piece of empty land versus buying a shop house. If you want regular income with some appreciation, you buy a shop house with income and then you get capital appreciation. But if you want pure capital appreciation, then you just buy a piece of empty land, like what Selangor Properties did 60 years ago, and allow the value to be unlocked and allow the long-term capital appreciation to materialize. So that is icapital.biz Berhad. That is the vehicle that we launched and promoted in 13 years ago.
icapital.biz meet my investment objective, which is long-term, and I know that my hard-earned money is in the hands of a trusted, experienced fund manager.
The second part is the philosophy that this fund represents.
Value investing, especially Mr. Tan. It's not just about investing, growing your wealth per se, but I learned a lot about life from investing. If you really want an investment which is worry-free and almost you can sleep well at night, this is one investment I normally recommend my friends because I feel that there is no risk.
We give you one simple promise that whatever we do will be done with integrity, and 13 years later, I will still deliver the same thing to you. On that, people believe in us and invested $250 million in icapital.biz Berhad.
Apologies, we are currently facing some technical issues. Please bear with us. We will resume the session once the problem is solved. Sorry for that.
It is slightly different from those AGM that I have attended. Right? In a sense, I receive a lot of information as well as insightful knowledge on stock exchange. Every AGM will highlight a lot of new things for us to learn.
The managing director actually shared not only the company performance, but also the insightful, the research that have been done by himself and the team.
He explains in great detail management style that make me understand his investment philosophy more. But throughout it all, there's a consistency, like discipline. Like people say, oh, why he didn't go in, the market went up. It's not about the market going up. It's whether the company is at a good price, has good management, has a good service.
It's the 3 I's that they promoted: integrity, independence, and intelligence.
I believe Mr. Tan really have that heart, to really want to make life better for people.
The most important thing is I don't lose money for investors. And you begin to appreciate why Buffett tells you don't lose money. And then don't forget that first rule. We have even given the example of buying a piece of empty land versus buying a shop house. If you want regular income with some appreciation, you buy a shop house with income and then you get capital appreciation. But if you want pure capital appreciation, then you just buy a piece of empty land, like what Selangor Properties did 60 years ago, and allow the value to be unlocked and allow the long-term capital appreciation to materialize. So that is icapital.biz Berhad. That is the vehicle that we launched and promoted in 13 years ago.
icapital.biz meet my investment objective, which is long-term. And I know that my hard-earned money is in the hands of a trusted, experienced fund manager.
The second part is the philosophy that this fund represents.
Value investing, especially Mr. Tan. It's not just about investing, growing your wealth per se, but I learned a lot about life from investing. If you really want an investment which is worry-free and almost you can sleep well at night, this is one investment I normally recommend my friends because I feel that there is no risk.
We give you one simple promise that whatever we do will be done with integrity, and 13 years later, I will still deliver the same thing to you. On that, people believe in us and invested $250 million in icapital.biz Berhad.
Apologies for the delay. We will now resume the session. Without further ado, let's welcome our speaker for today, Mr. Teng, designated person of icapital.biz Berhad.
Glitches. It happens. I don't know. It was working well before I took over the headset. The minute I took over the headset, I think there must be a message from heaven to say that I'm not supposed to talk. But nevertheless, we have communicated with heaven, and heaven says it's okay for me to start talking again. So here I am, talking about climate change. Before we proceed, let me just read out the results for you for the poll questions that we did a while ago. The results are interesting, very interesting. And in a way, the results don't surprise me. And in a way, they will surprise me and worry me and yet not worry me. Okay, first question, do you use handphone? 3% say no. Very interesting. I thought, I was in one of those camps where people don't use smartphone, but because of my Sejahtera now, I'm forced to use a smartphone. So I thought the no percentage should be 0, but you have 3% who don't use smartphone, 97% use smartphone. Then the next one is, how many hours do you use per day? Also shocking, 10% say they use 1 hour per day, their smartphone, right? 25% say they use 2 hours. 22% say they use 3 hours. Now the part where they say they use more than 4 hours per day, 44%. Oh my goodness. I'm amazed, I'm shocked. Question number 3. To solve climate change problem, should consumers use digital book instead of printed books? Not surprisingly, 64% say yeah, use digital book, and 36% say no, don't use digital books. The analysis, the research I will share with you afterwards, I guess will shock all of you. Question number 4. Do you think the problem of climate change can be solved? 57% say yes, 43% say no. Again, my conclusion probably will surprise you. And as I go through, you understand why I'm very pessimistic. Shall we start? Okay, climate change. I'm the presenter. Why did we choose climate change for this year? On top, at the moment of people's mind is the COVID-19 pandemic, right? Malaysia has improved, but the improvement seems to have stalled. Other countries like Germany, Austria, the pandemic seems to have worsened. And then next on our list will be the political crisis, which at this moment, Malacca is, in a way, our future is somewhat in the hands of the Malaccan voters. Then, this climate change problem. The climate change issue, the effect, the consequences are felt very gradually. When people talk about climate change crisis, a lot of times people don't feel the crisis because the drought, the forest fire happens somewhere else, not in your place. So where is the crisis? But the evidence, which I will be showing you next, I think it's very hard to argue with the evidence that there is climate change. Only people like the idiotic US former President Trump, or the equally naive Scott Morrison of Australia will deny climate change. Can we have a look at evidence? Okay, some evidence, because the evidence, there's a lot, right? I will just share with you some evidence because the fact of the situation is that, climate is always changing. So when people talk about climate change as a problem, in a way it's wrong. What has happened is that the rate of change has accelerated. And that rate of change, the question is, do you slow down the rate of change? Are you able to control the rate of change, or will it get worse? So let's look at the evidence first. This is the planet's average surface temperature since the late 19th century, right, has gone up by about 2.12 degrees Fahrenheit or 1.18 degrees Celsius. If you look at the chart from 800,000 years ago to recently, which is about 100 plus years ago, the climate will move, the average surface temperature will move up and down, up and down. Like I said, there's always climate change. But since 1950, the average surface temperature has skyrocketed. And at the current level, you can see in white, this is where we are. So the question is, do we want global climate to stay roughly at where the current level is? Are we able to achieve that? Or will the average surface temperature go up more than 1.5 degrees and go up by 2 degrees on average, or 2.5, or even 3 degrees on average per annum, annual average? The change, the rate of change, is caused by increased carbon dioxide emission into the atmosphere, right? And most of the warming occurred in the last 40, 50 years. And the most recent 7 years have been the warmest in terms of climate history. And 2016 and 2020 are the warmest year on record that planet Earth has experienced. This is another evidence to show you the coastal tide. And it shows that the sea level has been moving up very steadily. And the sources of the data, there are two. Nevertheless, the conclusion is the same, that sea level has changed, is rising, and will continue to rise. Planet Earth, beautiful. The one that you see, big one is planet Earth. The one far away is moon, the moon that belongs to planet Earth. So why is planet Earth so precious? Can't we just go to Venus? Can't we just go to Mars? Can't we just stay somewhere else? This is where, you know, when you look into this sort of situation, this sort of problem, there are a lot of very deep meaning, deep messages that come from some ancient philosophy that these people 2,000 odd years ago already saw what we should do. So let me come back to why is planet Earth so precious? And when you look at it, then you realize in life there are so many miracles. Our human body is a miracle. It's a miracle of miracle. Beyond ours, this body of ours, this life that we have as an individual, you look at the universal planetary system. Let me share with you why we must treasure planet Earth as much as we treasure our own lives. Next. The cause of climate change is greenhouse effect, right? The one on there's greenhouse effect all over the universe, all the planetary system. So it's not just peculiar to planet Earth. The one on the left is Mars. It has got a very thin atmosphere, and all of which are nearly carbon dioxide. Because of the low atmospheric pressure and no methane or water vapor to reinforce this very weak greenhouse effect. So Mars, the surface is basically frozen. On the right hand side is Venus. There's also greenhouse. There's also greenhouse effect. The atmosphere of Venus is also like Mars, almost all carbon dioxide. But Venus has about 154,000 times as much carbon dioxide in its atmosphere as Earth, or 19,000 times more than Mars. So the opposite effect happens. The surface temperature on Venus is super hot. Hot enough to they can even melt metal. So you have Mars, which is the nearest to us, Venus, which is further from us. One is too cold, one is too hot. The greenhouse effect, what is it? It is the way in which heat is trapped close to the Earth's surface by gases, greenhouse gases, right? And this is like a blanket wrapped around the Earth, keeping the planet warmer than what it should be and colder than what it would be. The greenhouse gases include carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, right? Now, this carbon dioxide that we have, you must have carbon dioxide. Don't think that, oh, carbon dioxide emission is bad, it's bad, it's bad. No, because it helps to stabilize the planet's atmosphere. You remove carbon dioxide and the Earth's surface temperature would drop by 33 degrees Celsius. And then it will be too cold for us, too cold for precious human beings like us to survive. Greenhouse gases occur naturally, right? So Earth, because of its condition, is sometimes called the Goldilocks planet. I would term it differently. I would call it the miracle planet, because conditions on planet Earth are not too hot, not too cold, just right for a lot of idiotic human beings like us to flourish. Remember, I showed you Mars, I showed you Venus, both too hot, too cold, and here you have this planet that is just made perfect for human survival, animals, vegetation, and so on and so forth. This is why planet Earth is so precious. It is a miracle. Thanks. If you have too much, if you warm up the planet too much, right? If you have too much greenhouse gases, if you have too much carbon dioxide, then there will be some consequences, right? And the greenhouse effect will come from human activities, basically the burning of fossil fuels. This is in the past. On average, with global climate warming, Earth will become warmer, but we do not know exactly which area will be warmer, which areas will be cooler. Some areas may prefer warmer temperature, right? If you are somewhere in some cold freezing area, you might want your temperature to be warmer. In countries like Malaysia, I think we will welcome if our average temperature were to drop by 2 to 3 degrees every day. It would be so lovely. That cannot be predicted where it will hit. And then there will be more evaporation, it means more rainfall, and the patterns will change. Some areas will be wetter, some areas will be drier. So that is certain, but how it will hit, which part of planet Earth will hit, that scientists cannot predict. The stronger greenhouse will also warm the ocean, melt the glacier, depending on how much warming it is, whether it's 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees, 2.5, 3 degrees, right? Then you determine whether the glaciers will be melted or not, whether the ice sheets will be melted, then sea level will rise. So will we have a state where those of us who stay in Kuala Lumpur, suddenly, you can go to beaches near you? I don't know. Scientists do not know. But what we can tell you is that the sea level will rise. And just out of interest, there's one tropical country that has got glacier. One country that's in the tropical belt that has got glacier. Every time we think of glacier, we think of Iceland, as if they have a monopoly of glacier, or New Zealand. No, glaciers can be found everywhere. And this one tropical country, those of you who like to take a guess, that has got glacier is Indonesia. Our neighbor has got glacier. It is in the far eastern side, at the very top of the highest mountain, but that glacier in Indonesia is melting and disappearing fast. I mean, these are evidence that I will show you, which are a bit unusual, which are a bit different from the usual evidence that you see. But the conclusion is climate change, the fast rate of climate change is here, and it will stay. Thanks. I don't think we will go for the YouTube. Never mind. It's just a repeat of what I've said. Can I just have a bit of we won't play the YouTube, we'll move to the next slide. What causes climate change? You heard greenhouse effect, but if you look deeper, it's more than that. There are two very important main factors that cause climate change: cumulative emission and Christianity. I'm sure when I mention Christianity, large majority of you will fall off the chair. But let me show you what I mean. Cumulative emission is very important because if you read the media currently, or the Western politicians, they always say, China, stop your coal production, stop your coal consumption. You are the biggest polluter, the biggest contributor to climate change. Yeah, recently, yes. But you must understand how pollution, how this sort of effect unfold. Then you realize that what is more important is not the current biggest polluter. What is important is the polluting countries over the last 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, and the role that cumulative emission plays in changing our climate. Now, if you look at very long history, there's a direct linear relationship between the total amount of carbon dioxide released by human activity and the level of warming at the Earth's surface. Nobody dispute that, right? And what is also not disputed is that so far the Earth's surface has warmed up at an average of 1.2 degrees Celsius. That came about because of Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution, the first Industrial Revolution, second Industrial Revolution that has occurred, that has contributed to the warming that we've experienced so far. Now, another important thing is there's a time lag between the initial release of carbon dioxide and the amount of warming that it will eventually cause. So what we are facing now, the global warming that we're facing now, is because of what the factories in Britain did 100 years ago. It's what the railroad in America did 100 years ago. We are suffering the consequences now. So the current warming is simply determined by the cumulative total of carbon dioxide emission over the last 200 years. Then there's another concept called carbon budget. Carbon budget is the total amount of CO2 that can be emitted to stay below a given limit of global temperature, right? If you want the world to limit your global warming to, let's say, for example, 1.5 degrees Celsius, then there's only a certain amount of carbon emission that the Earth can take. If your emission goes beyond that, then you go above 1.5 degrees. So this carbon budget is extremely important. It's tied to cumulative emission. The Europeans, the British, the Americans have pumped up around 2,500 billion tons of CO2 since 1850. This is not since 1750 because the first industrial revolution started in 1750. So this is already closer to the second industrial revolution. Now, the carbon budget that we have for the Earth to stay below 1.5 degree of warming is 3,000 billion tons. So Europe, Britain, America have used up 2,500 billion tons of this 3,000 billion tons. So the entire planet now has got only 500 billion tons of carbon dioxide left. If you go beyond that, if you emit above 500 billion tons, then we will get 2 degrees warming, 2.5 degrees, 3 degrees warming. So this 2,500 billion tons of carbon dioxide emission is what happened over the last 200 odd years. That is cumulative emission. And this is the part is linked to climate justice, which I will talk to you later. Climate justice basically is if you are the poor Africans, the poor Indonesians, the poor Pakistani, who says, look, I need to cut down my trees, I need to cut down my forest so I can build a factory or I can develop my country. Then you, the Europeans, the British and Americans cannot do deforestation because you will worsen the carbon emission. But then if I don't do this industrialization, this modernization, how can I get out of poverty? But then this Angmo, this Masale, the Europeans who are already filthy rich, the British and Americans, they're already filthy rich, they got high standards of living. They say, no, you must protect climate, you must make sure climate doesn't change. You must stay poor. This is linked to climate justice. So now we know we got only a bit left, about 500 just now I said, right? That is only equivalent to about 12 years. If you use 2020 level of carbon dioxide emission, you have only about 12 years before the planet exceed the 1.5 degree warming. So by the end of this year, our precious planet has used up 86% of the carbon budget for a 50% chance of staying below 1.5 degree Celsius, right? Or we have used up 89% of the carbon budget for a 66% chance of staying below 1.5 degree. So in other words, the cumulative emission that those imperial powers, the colonizers in Europe, in Britain, in Japan, in United States, have taken up 86%. That's what we have left. We got only 14% left. And you got to figure how to distribute that 14%. So if you look at a single year now, China is the biggest polluter. But if you look at it from a cumulative basis, US is the biggest cumulative. They have released 20% of the world's total. China, about 11%, Russia, Brazil, Indonesia. The European countries, if you take them singly, each one, Germany, UK, about 3-4%. But if you total them up, Germany, UK, France, Italy, Spain, and all that, they make up a large chunk of this contribution to historical emission. Now, this is only from 1850. If you go further back to 1750, the first industrial revolution, then Germany, UK, France will go up in the ranking as in terms of the amount of contribution to cumulative emission. Very graphically show you, US is top of the chart, right? Then you have China, you have Soviet Union, Germany, UK, and so on and so forth. This since 1750. But what is also important is per capita. Of course, China has got 1.4 billion people, right? US about 320 million people. Of course, on an absolute basis, now China is wealthier. China emits more. But look, it's got 1.4 billion people. So look at it from a per capita basis, right? Until very recently, United Kingdom, with only about 60-odd million people, was ahead of China in terms of per capita carbon dioxide emission. On a per capita basis, China only recently became a significant contributor. This chart captures everything that I said. At the top, Australia. On a per capita basis, Australia with only 21 million people is the highest in the world. And of course, the big brother of Australia, United States, is there together with Australia in contributing to climate problems that the world is facing. After that, Japan and Germany, right? And you can see lower down there, China. But China on a per capita basis crossed United Kingdom only about 1 or 2 years ago. This is important because you have to take into account population. Why? Because Africa's got about 1.4 billion people. India's got 1.4 billion people. Indonesia, 270 million people. Pakistan, Egypt, Brazil. These are all developing, poor developing countries that want to improve the standard of living of their people. So what is going to happen to climate change? Same thing. Shows you since 1750, right? The share of, this one is good because it shows you a few conclusions. On a cumulative basis, the people that are responsible, the people that should be held responsible, guilty of destroying the planet's climate is Europe, United States. These are the two main blocks. Few people know that the biggest single organization, the one single organization that contributes the most to climate change is the US Department of Defense. They don't talk about this. They talk about trying to keep your navigation lane free, support democracy, and all the nonsense and all the crap. But they don't tell you that $700 billion that they spend on military, which is more than any other country in the world, contributes so much to climate change that the carbon emission from just the US Defense Department is more than 140 countries in the world. That's how polluting the US aircraft carrier. Why do you need to send aircraft carrier, the warships, around China every day? Why do you need to send all your submarines, and get knocked down at the bay at the bottom of the ocean? You don't need all this. You can just be a peaceful country and you can help in climate change. But unfortunately, US has been at war with somebody in the world. Somebody is always fighting the US. So they need to have this 2 million people in the armed forces, 11 nuclear aircraft carrier, 800 military bases all over the world. And at the end of it, they consume what? Most of it in the form of fossil fuel. So what we show here is the Defense Department greenhouse emission were larger than the entire Sweden or entire Denmark, which is unnecessary, because if US is a lot more peaceful, the climate would benefit. These are the international agreements. It started with Montreal in 1987. It was not supposed to tackle climate change, but it was an environmental accord that set the foundation for future agreement. Then you have the 1992, which was signed by 197 countries. This Framework Convention on Climate Change produced the Kyoto Protocol in 2005 and the 2015 Paris Agreement. Right. For the Kyoto Protocol in 2005, it was not so compelling because developing countries like India and China were not compelled to take action, not like the 2015 Paris Agreement. US signed the agreement, but it was never rectified. So they are never part of the Kyoto Protocol. They were not bound by the obligations of Kyoto Protocol. Then, of course, the Paris Agreement, which up to now is the most significant agreement. And as you know, the only country to withdraw from this agreement was Donald Trump, although Biden rejoined subsequently. But nevertheless, this is the one that talks about keeping global average temperature below 1.5 degrees Celsius and to keep global average temperature from rising more than 2 degrees above pre-industrial level. This is known as carbon neutral or carbon neutrality. Is there hope for planet Earth? Can we prevent disastrous climate change? Next. You see that developing countries like India, China, Indonesia, and so on are seeing the economy growing at a faster pace. You have no choice because they have to improve the standards of living. And we see this trend continuing. For various reasons, which I'll share with you later, I am not optimistic. I'm pessimistic that the global community will be able to prevent disastrous climate change. I don't think the 2015 Paris Agreement target will be met. It is too late for the global citizens to do anything. The first reason is that the biggest culprits, Europe, Britain, Japan, US, Australia, Russia, Canada, they're still in this state of mind, in this very shocking state of denial, and refuse to accept responsibilities arising from climate justice, which I mentioned somewhat earlier. But it is not just those type of leaders. You take a professor from MIT, America's top university. He wrote an article in December 2019, right? And he says there are 5 biggest challenges in dealing with climate change. The first biggest challenge is, for now, climate change is still hypothetical. And this professor doesn't talk about the role of cumulative emission. He doesn't talk about the need for climate justice. All these things are left out. So if a learned professor from MIT can take such a view, can you imagine what it is like in those leaders in the Western countries? How can they accept more responsibilities? I am very, very pessimistic that they can and that they will. Another reason is I don't see modern science and technology providing the necessary solution. In fact, it's on the contrary. Modern science and technology, or as what we know, Western science and technology, will worsen the climate change problem. Right? Now, earlier, you all say that climate change problem can be solved, and so on and so forth. I take the opposite view. So then people may say, and then you all say 64% say that using digital books is better than using printed books in terms of environmental impact. Actually, the truth is the opposite, which will come to you as a shock. So because people talk about computers, the internet, smartphones, smart cities, and all this technology revolution based on digitalization, wouldn't that help to solve climate change problem? Unfortunately, no. I am not convinced that they will be able to alleviate, they will make it worse. The underlying philosophy of Western science and technology is all wrong. Western science and technology allows and incentivizes countries and companies to keep pursuing destructive climate changing path. What does that mean? Build more, buy more, consume more, dispose more. They ignore the fundamental question of whether the things that you build, that you buy and consume, whether they are needed in the first place. Why do you have to keep on changing your mobile phone? Is it necessary? Why do you have to keep on updating your Windows version? Which then requires you to change your computer or laptop or mobile device or smartphone. So as you buy more, build more, consume more, you got more to dispose. And as you dispose more and do all these things, you increase the level of human activity more and more. And when you increase human activity more and more, it leads to more pollution, more emission, and more climate change. So the underlying philosophy of Western science, Western capitalism, Western technology is to incentivize countries to practice an additive philosophy. Additive philosophy means that the more you build, the better your company, the bigger your company is, the better it is. To deal with climate change requires a philosophy that subtracts, or at least a philosophy that maintains status quo or business as usual. Later on, I will share with you my case study comparing the environmental impact of buying a printed book versus buying a digital book. Western science and technology trace back to the many different phases of colonization, imperialism, industrial revolution, and capitalism. Colonization and imperialism, they They started with the term Age of Discovery. Remember the time when Ferdinand Magellan, Vasco da Gama sailed around the world and so on and so forth. They call it Age of Discovery, Age of Exploration. That's because you look at it from the Europeans' point of view. Look at it from the poor Indians' point of view in Latin America. Look at it from the poor indigenous people in Africa and in Asia. There was not a single discovery by Vasco da Gama or Ferdinand Magellan or Captain Scott who went to Sydney Harbour. Those countries were already discovered long ago. Christopher Columbus did not discover America. It was discovered by the Navajo Indians, Cherokee Indians, and all that. This age of discovery, which started around 15th century, was actually the beginning of conquest, slavery, genocides, and massive cultural and environmental destruction. Led by the Portuguese, then by the Spanish. North and South America were colonized. After that, Africa, Middle East, India, East and Southeast Asia again were colonized. And I use the word rape because it was rape in every sense of the word. Not only were hundreds of millions of local people, indigenous people, forcibly converted to Christianity, the local languages were replaced by Spanish, Portuguese. Have you ever asked yourself why the Brazilians speak Portuguese or why the Chileans speak Spanish? That is not their native language. Then after that, resentful and jealous of these riches that Portugal and Spain got from all these colonies all over the world. Remember, Spain even came all the way to Philippines and conquered Philippines and converted, Christianized the Philippines, the Filipinos, and converted their language. So after that, the latecomers, England, France, Holland, joined in this global conquest. So this competition became heated. It became a mad race to have more and more slaves, more and more colonies, more and more of everything. This is imperialism, colonization, together, which spark industrial revolution because you need to find better technology to be able to be better than your competitors. And then that together combined with capitalism, it produced a societal structure which is destroying our planet. This is just to show graphically. The one there is, what is his name? John Cecil Rhodes. He's the worst of the colonial British, is the worst imperialist. So for those of you who get awarded under the Rhodes Scholarship, you might want to rethink whether it is such an achievement to get Rhodes Scholarship because he actually brutalized a big part of East Africa. Talk to the people in Kenya, talk to the people in Uganda about Cecil Rhodes, and they'll spit in your face. Thanks. As I mentioned earlier, the economic, social structure that we have now is always to increase consumption. GDP growth slow down. Oh, stimulate consumption. Unemployment rising, stimulate consumption. There's always the same answer, the same mantra. That mantra is wrong. So the second industrial revolution was around the 19th century. That led to the new imperialism, which I showed you just now, Cecil Rhodes, because it led to scramble of Africa where Italy, Belgium, Belgium is such a tiny fat. It can control so many big countries and control so many Africans. So this country were greedy, they were selfish, and what they do is they destroy the local environment, not just the language, not just the religion, not just the cultural practices, but the physical environment. They chop down the trees. We are in Malaya, right? We are in Malaysia, right? We have a lot of forests. You want to blame the CPO plantation people for deforestation? Hey, hello. You can ask your Tuan, all your Masale Tuan. Didn't they chop down the trees to plant rubber trees? Isn't that deforestation? That's exactly the same. So they went around all over the world to plant rubber trees, to plant whatever they need in their home country for their factories and for their consumption. So they destroyed the local environment. So you have, when you add all this up, you have a global environmental catastrophe in the making. Basically, underlying modern science, which is Western science, underlying industrial revolution, underlying capitalism is a culture of greed. I really got 10 million, I want 20 million, I want 100 million, I want 1 billion. It's a culture of wanting to add more, wanting more and more. How can such a philosophy, how can such a mindset prevent global climate from changing at a slower pace? The planet Earth has stayed the same. The so-called natural water that we have has been the same ever since humankind started. The air that we have, the quantity is still the same. Next. To look at the root cause effect relationship of climate change, you must look at Christianity. Professor White said that Christian influence in the Middle Ages was the root cause. At that time, he called it ecological crisis, but it's the same as our climate change crisis, because he spoke about this in 1966, when I was only 12 years old. 1966, where none of us talk about climate change, none of us talk about ecological crisis. But he had already identified that Christianity is the fundamental cause of our environmental crisis. Professor White maintained that modern science and technology are the products of Western culture, and Western culture has its roots in Christian attitudes and principles, and thus derives from Christianity's arrogance towards nature. It views nature as having no reason for existence except to serve mankind. Professor White's article, he gave a speech in 1966, he published article in 1967, is considered to be the most definitive indictment of Christianity for crimes against nature. Let's get some extracts from Professor White's brilliant article. What did Christianity tell people about their relations with the environment? While many of the world's mythologies provide stories of creation, Greco-Roman mythology was singularly incoherent in this respect, right? Indeed, the idea of a beginning was impossible
Even this is also not
in their framework.
even this also not my
In sharp
one.
contrast,
Yeah, my one was
Christianity
visible.
inherited from Judaism not only a concept of time as non-repetitive and linear, but a striking story of creation. By gradual stages, a loving and all-powerful God had created light and darkness, the heavenly bodies, the earth, and all its plants, animals, birds, and fishes. Finally, God created Adam, and as an afterthought, Eve, to keep the man from being lonely. This is all extracted. I have not changed a single word from Professor White's article. Next. Man named all the animals, thus establishing his dominance over them. God planned all of this explicitly for man's benefit and rule. No item in the physical creation had any purpose save to save man's purposes. And although man's body is made of clay, it's not simply part of nature. It is made in God's image. Especially in its Western form, Christianity is the most anthropocentric religion. I'll explain to this what is anthropocentric religion after. It's the most anthropocentric religion the world has ever seen. As early as the 2nd century, both these Europeans, Tertullian and Saint Irenaeus or Leons in France, were insisting that when God shaped Adam, he was foreshadowing the image of the incarnate Christ, the second Adam. Man shares in great measure God's transcendence of nature. Christianity, in absolute contrast to ancient paganism and Asia's religions like Buddhism, Taoism, and so on, Christianity not only established a dualism of man and nature, but also insisted that it is God's will that man exploit nature for his proper ends. Let me just ask you all to think for a while. Ponder just for a moment, because what I said so far will have shocked you a lot of times. These are things that you probably have never read, never heard before, until Tan Teng came and talked to you. Does it make sense? Because if you look at, you see, Christianity in absolute contrast to Asian paganism and Asia's religion, right? What are Asia's main religion? Hinduism, Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, and so on. So why is it that when India and China were the global powers of the world, why is it that we don't have all this climate change problem? Professor White added, before one cut a tree, mine a mountain, or dam, block a brook, it was important to placate the spirit in charge of that particular situation and to keep it placated. By destroying pagan animism, Christianity made it possible to exploit nature in a mood of indifference to the feelings of natural objects. You know, we always, we read in history book, we read in all kinds of books, oh, Christians are civilizing the pagans, Christians are civilizing the enemies. But now we know who is the one who is having the last laugh in this civilizing lesson. Those people knew a lot more than the people who were converting them. But as we now recognize, somewhat over a century ago, science and technology, hitherto quite separate activities, joined together, science and technology joined together to give mankind powers which are out of control. The first industrial revolution, the second industrial revolution. If you look at quick European history, you have the Renaissance, you have the rise of science and technology about 15th, 16th century onwards, right? The Enlightenment age and so on, where they look at things differently. And then that's the emergence of science, which gave rise to modern Western science and technology, which eventually gave rise to laissez-faire capitalism. All of them combined, joined together, and gave mankind, man, for the first time, power which they had never had before. So Professor White says, if this is so, Christianity bears a huge, huge burden of guilt. I personally doubt that disastrous ecological backlash can be avoided simply by applying to our problems more science and more technology. Our science and technology have grown out of Christian attitudes towards man's relation to nature, which are almost universally held, not only by Christians and new Christians, but also by those who fondly regard themselves as post-Christians. Blah, blah, blah. I won't repeat. Basically saying that, look, because of the Christian approach, the Christian teachings and all that, to a Christian, a tree is no more than just a physical fact. But to these people who worship the tree, who pray to the tree, to a Taoist who see balance, harmony between man and nature, a tree is more than just a physical tree. Next. Hence, we shall continue to have a worsening ecological crisis until we reject the Christian axiom that nature has no reason for existence save to serve mankind. And he marked Industrial Revolution. Don't forget, he said all this in 1966, where there was no scientific evidence that we have now. not from NASA, not from the IPCC. There was none of this scientific evidence to say that Industrial Revolution was the turning point in ecological history. And he said this 50 years ago, right? That Industrial Revolution marked the turning point in the history of planet's ecology. He also suggests that the mentality of the Industrial Revolution, that the Earth was a resource for human consumption, was much older than the invention of machinery. It actually has its roots in medieval Christianity and its attitude towards nature. So who is this Professor Dean Townsend White to talk about Christianity and the environment? Is he Greco or what is he? He was born in 1907. He was a professor of Christian history, medieval Christian history at Princeton and Stanford University. His father was a Calvinist professor of Christian ethics and had a master's degree at a theological seminary. So obviously, Professor White is very qualified to talk about his religion's arrogance towards nature. On my side, I arrived at the same pessimistic conclusion of climate change through my own research, through my own reason. But the minute when I read Professor's article, I was so able to understand, so easy to understand, so easily able to accept his reasoning and conclusion. So there's this underlying mindset of greed, of wanting more and more. The age of discoveries, the age of exploration were all genocidal conquests of indigenous people in what is now known North America, South America, and the rest of the world. I promise you, anthropocentrism, it argues that human beings are the central and the most significant entities in the world. This is a basic belief embedded in many Western religions and philosophy. Anthropocentrism regards humans as separate from and superior to nature and holds that human life has intrinsic value, while other entities, including animals, plants, mineral resources, and so on, are resources that human beings can justifiably exploit for the benefit of humankind. Now you begin to understand why this religion can cause an ecological crisis, right? Many philosophers, many ethical philosophers find the roots of anthropocentrism in the creation story told in the book of Genesis in the Judeo-Christian Bible. Anyway, we won't go into this because it becomes too technical. The point is, this is what anthropocentrism is all about. I think we won't have time to go into this. Is quite, but it's 13 minutes. It's extremely useful. Never mind. Should we play? What do you think? We should play. Okay. My staff here, I did a quick poll. All my staff here say yes, let's play. Okay, let's play this YouTube.
At the dawn of the 16th century, the Earth was cooling down. This period of global cooling was most likely caused by volcanic eruptions, shifts in oceanic currents, and orbital fluctuation. European rivers froze, and famines struck all over Asia. But in the 1600s, global temperatures dropped even further. And this time, it was caused by humans. Specifically, it was driven by the settler colonial violence that tore through the lives of millions of people indigenous to what we now call North America. The Great Dying. A genocide that killed 90% of the estimated 60.5 million indigenous peoples on the continent. The land-grabbing pursuits of American colonists killed 56 million people, with numbers possibly even higher. This genocide was so massive that it led to a decrease of global atmospheric carbon levels by 3.5 parts per million, enough to lower temperatures across the world. But this is just the start of the United States' role in changing the climate. The country has a long and dark legacy tied to climate change that continues to this day. This is the story of how the United States caused and is still causing climate change. This video was made possible by the people who support me on Patreon. Get early access to all my videos by becoming an OCC Patreon supporter. When it comes to emissions, the United States is the undisputed champ. America is the largest historical emitter. Its cumulative emissions are almost double that of China's, a fact which often gets lost in comparisons of the two countries' current emission rates. Yes, China is emitting more right now, but keep in mind that a lot of Chinese industrial pollution is driven by demand from the United States. There are also 4 times as many people using energy in China than in the United States. And because CO2 lingers in the atmosphere for up to 200 years, cumulative emissions are a much more effective tool to understand who is driving climate change. And it's undeniably the United States. Not only did the US nurture the oil industry into existence with tax credits, technological advancements, and ravenous capitalist consumption, but it's done so again with the natural gas industry in the early 2000s, helping to lock in a new form of fossil fuels for decades to come with extensive pipeline construction and government subsidies. In part, this was to quench America's insatiable thirst for fossil fuels and material goods. The US has one of the highest CO2 emissions rates per capita in the world, a rate that is almost 3 times the global average. And the United States is the biggest producer and consumer of natural gas and oil, as well as home to the second largest fleet of coal factories. In short, the United States is responsible for an overwhelming share of cumulative emissions and is still sheltering fossil fuel industries that are at the root of the climate crisis. Yes, the United States has now committed to a 50 to 52% reduction of carbon emissions by 2030, which is certainly ambitious. But according to Climate Action Tracker, this reduction still falls almost 11 percentage points short of the emissions cuts needed to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. US electricity consumption and overall emissions levels are dropping, but slowly. It's also the second biggest country in terms of renewable capacity, and infrastructure for clean energy does seem to be growing. But again, it's still too slow. Considering the 40+ years of relative inaction since expert climate scientists warned of the threat of global warming, it's hard to imagine the United States cutting their emissions in half over the next 9 years. Politicians like Democrat Joe Manchin, who are firmly in the pocket of big oil companies.
Joe Manchin, I talk to his office every week. He is the kingmaker.
And the 130 members of Congress who deny or doubt that the climate crisis even exists continue to resist any of the actions necessary to reverse course, especially any climate action that might hinder a giant corporation's ability to make money by exploiting workers and natural resources. In short, before it even reaches its tentacles across the world, the American empire is responsible for far more than its fair share of emissions. And, like its refusal to recognize its violent exploitation abroad, as we'll see shortly, the ruling class of the United States refuses to recognize the harm caused by our use of fossil fuels as long as burning them is quote-unquote good for the economy. As in, good for shareholders and executives at major fossil fuel corporations. In order to fuel its excessive capitalist need to produce and accumulate goods, the United States has built an empire. One that stretches across the world in the form of nearly 800 military bases in 80 countries. Every year, the federal government sets aside nearly half of its discretionary budget, some $778 billion in 2020, for military spending. Some in the US view this gargantuan fighting force as a spreader of democracy and as the world's police force. And in a way, they're right. The US military does act as the police force of the world. Because, like the police, the US military ruthlessly safeguards the interests of capitalist multinationals and the state at the expense of the poor and people of color. This is best exemplified in the slew of coups, wars, and military interventions that have carved out American control of foreign oil fields. From the US-backed Iranian coup to the Carter Doctrine in the 1980s that explicitly committed the United States to defend the oil fields of the Persian Gulf against external threats, to the Gulf War, to the Iraq War, and to the two failed Venezuelan coups trying to topple presidents nationalizing oil reserves, the list goes on. Not only do these imperialist attacks secure and subsidize the future of oil use in a time when we need to be doing the exact opposite, but they also destabilize regions so that they're even more vulnerable to the catastrophes made more extreme by the climate crisis. Iraq has been experiencing this reality firsthand. After almost 40 years of US-fueled conflicts, the people and landscapes of Iraq are bruised. Wetlands along the Tigris and Euphrates were purposefully drained in the 1990s as a method of retaliation against communities reliant on their biodiverse ecosystems. So by 2001, 90% of Iraqi marshlands disappeared. And provisional governments that have failed to provide robust support to the Iraqi people, decimated infrastructure, and schools have all made recovering from a multi-decade war much harder. And the climate crisis has just made that recovery even harder. Increased heat in Iraq means increased dust storms and less arable lands. In Fao, arable land has decreased from 7.5 square kilometers to 3.7 square kilometers, while in Tikar it has dropped from 100 square kilometers to just 12.5 square kilometers, which means that Iraqi farmers who've tended to the land for generations are now being forced to find some other means of subsistence.
الجفاف عم هذه المناطق يعني بمسافات كبيرة جدا، لذلك تشوف حتى أنه صارت هجرة من الريف إلى المدينة، تناقص أعداد المزارعين.
In short, adapting to climate chaos is already difficult for those on the front lines. But the US has made it even harder by selfishly scorching the region in fire and fury to protect their oil interests. So, in a cruel twist of the knife, the US not only makes adapting to climate change more difficult in the regions they exploit, but they're the very ones fueling the fires of the climate crisis. Indeed, the Department of Defense is the single largest consumer of oil in the world. It has a bigger footprint than 140 countries. But military violence isn't the only tool the United States has used in its efforts to control global markets. Alongside the United States' military exploits, US-backed sanctions are wreaking havoc across the globe. War and sanctions are the 1-2 punch of US imperialism. Together, they work to bully any dissident or leftist governments from straying far from the United States' neoliberal agenda of material and labor exploitation of the global South to fuel the luxuries of the global North. US-backed economic sanctions impact nearly 1/3 of humanity in some 30 countries, and essentially work to starve countries into submission. In a world now experiencing an increasing number of crises, this is unethical and unjust. Guns and missiles might not be present, but sanctions still kill. In Cuba, COVID-19 has been exacerbated by the tightening of economic sanctions under the Trump regime. While in Yemen, under a US-backed Saudi blockade, over 20 million people are suffering from food insecurity, with 50,000 children dying of starvation in 2017. This, in a country expected to experience more climate change-driven droughts and heat waves. To compound the harm, the US is reluctant to shelter refugees or migrants. So while the US continues to pour carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and heat up the planet, it's simultaneously tearing away the ability of countries on the front lines of climate chaos to deal with catastrophes. And then it's closing its eyes to the consequences. In order to truly face the climate crisis, then, we must forge an anti-imperialist agenda. At the 2009 Conference of Parties in Copenhagen, otherwise known as COP15, the world was on the brink of a preliminary form of climate agreement when Bolivia, Venezuela, Tuvalu, Sudan, and a few other countries refused to sign on. Their reason? Imperialist powers like the US and the European Union rejected the notion that they should own up to their climate debt, a term that calls for reparations for the hundreds of years of emissions and colonial violence doled out by the global north onto the global south. Despite backlash, Bolivia and its comrades were right. Any effective climate agenda must incorporate the repair that comes with paying off the climate debt. The US not only must end its imperialist interventions, but do the opposite and aid countries in no-strings-attached funding of renewable and technological revolutions led by the Global South as a means to escape reliance on fossil fuels. But repairing the harm of centuries of American imperialism doesn't stop there. It also means significant demilitarization of the US war machine while simultaneously sheltering the growing population of refugees fleeing the climate crisis. Ultimately, the United States has been at the front lines of digging the world into a deep hole of climate chaos. So, in order to repair the damage it's done, the US not only needs to stop digging, but turn its resources towards building a ladder so that we might all escape the worst of climate catastrophe. Unfortunately, videos like these, while very important, do terribly with the YouTube algorithm and sponsors don't want to touch them. But there is a way you can help. Becoming an OCC Patreon supporter helps Our Changing Climate stay afloat and independent. As an OCC patron, you'll not only gain early access to videos, but also special behind-the-scenes updates and a members-only Discord channel. In addition, each month, my supporters vote on an environmental group that I then donate a portion of my monthly revenue to. Patreon supporters are the financial backbone of the Our Changing Climate operation. Without them, I wouldn't be able to take creative risks and dive into difficult topics. So if you want to help keep this channel alive or are feeling generous, head over to patreon.com/ourchangingclimate or use the link in the description and become an OCC patron. If you're not interested or aren't financially able to, then no worries. You can help the channel out by subscribing, liking the video, and commenting. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and I will see you in 2 weeks.
Okay, are we on? Right. So can we move on? That's what I've just concluded. It's on cumulative emission and the role of Christianity. And this YouTube, it's incredible. The things that they have shared, the facts that they've shared are unbelievable. So we move on to the importance of climate justice. Next. Right. So if you want to solve the problem of climate changing at too fast a rate, you must solve climate justice. But I'm not convinced. I'm not optimistic that the world can reverse global warming, because this climate injustice, the inability of the global community to deal with climate injustice is unbelievable. It will not, the climate injustice will stay, and it will stay for, well, I think for a long, long time to come. The Institute of Development Studies, based at University of Sussex, says that climate change is fundamentally an issue of justice. And I agree 100% with this. And what is climate justice? Or I call it climate injustice. The equation is very simple, right? The impact of global warming and climate change is felt disproportionately by the poorest communities. The communities who have done the least damage to our planet's climate. They hardly could survive, hardly had enough to eat, and they did the least damage, right? But they feel the greatest impact of global warming and climate change. This is a very interesting research done by Oxfam and Stockholm Environment Institute. So from 1990 to 2015, they found that the richest 1%, which is about 63 million people, were responsible for 15% of cumulative emission and 9% of carbon budget. This figure is twice as much as the poorest half of the world's population, which is in the billions, right? While the total growth in emissions of the richest 1% was 3 times that of the poorest 50%. If you go down to the next category, the richest 5%, which is about 300 over million people, they are responsible for 1/3 or 37% of the total growth in emission. And go down to the next category, the richest 10%, which is about 600 odd million people. So 10% of the world's population, the richest 10% of the world's population contributed to 52% of cumulative carbon emission. And in those 25 years, from 1990 to 2015, this richest 10% of the world's population depleted the global carbon budget by 31%. And then the poorest 50%, which is about 3 over billion people, were responsible for just 7% of cumulative emission. And these 3 over billion people use up just 4% of the available carbon budget. I mean, this is clearly injustice. Where is the justice? From the research, I quote a few extracts. So basically saying that the carbon budget has been squandered in servicing the increasing consumption of the already rich people. Instead of lifting people out of poverty, instead of using our carbon budget to lift people out of poverty, we use our carbon budget to let the already rich people to consume more. Right? And it took about 140 years to use 700 gigatons of the carbon budget. And then only 25 years to use about the same amount. Half of this was because of the consumption of just the richest 10 people. I think basically what it's saying is this, right? If we continue like that, where a few people get to enjoy this wonderful climate that nature has created, how can you solve climate change problem? Because you're asking the poor people to sacrifice even more. You cannot chop down trees. You cannot use firewood. You cannot use coal. But the filthy rich can consume and do whatever they want. Unequal economic growth slows poverty reduction rates. But unequal growth has another cost to it. It means that the carbon budget, the world's carbon budget, is rapidly depleted. Like I said earlier, the depletion is not to make poor people less poor, but it's to make the very rich people enjoy even more unnecessary consumption. Doubling the per capita footprint of the poorest 50% of the world's population from 1990 to 2015 would have increased our global emission by less than the growth in emission contributed by the richest 1%. 1%, remember, is only a few million people. 50% poor is a few billion people. Right? So basically, you need to have a more equitable use we only have a bit left of carbon budget, 16%. So how do we divide this 16% of carbon budget equitably in a fair manner? That is why the climate agreements all won't work. Because you look at COP26, the latest one from Glasgow, where India and China could not commit to reducing coal usage, that they could not commit to totally avoiding the use of coal. So they changed to reduction in coal usage. And you look at the headlines, every freaking Western media, almost every freaking Western politician basically criticized China. India was left out, even though India was the same as China. China was criticized, they politicized the whole thing. When what we should talk about is climate justice, not political nonsense. Thanks. Half of the emissions of the richest 10% are from the citizens of North America and Europe, and about 20% came from China and India. Again, the rich. Point number 9. Those of you who drive SUV, does that include the wildfire? Does it include wildfire? SUV, no. That's MPV. SUV would be those sports utility vehicles. They are the biggest source of carbon emission growth after the power sector. Half of this SUV are sold, half of new cars sold in US and 1/3 of cars sold in EU are SUVs. So you tell them, you tell these people who buy the SUVs, maybe the SUV will be your Porsche Cayenne. That will be an SUV, I think. Those who buy the Porsche Cayenne, tell him, hey, don't buy a Porsche Cayenne, buy a MyV, so that somebody in a poor country can use your carbon budget. Would that ever happen? Oh my goodness. That will be the day when I will probably be in heaven. This is the summary of the finding, right? The richest 1%, the richest 10%. The richest 10% contributed 46%, almost half of total cumulative emission from 1990 to 2015, 52%, right? And the poorest 50% of the 50% poorest people have got only 4% left of the carbon budget. Thanks. So the climate change and the injustice that you see now is the result of political choices made by the Western colonial powers since the 15th century, since when the Portuguese came and conquered Malacca, for example. And I've mentioned this earlier, explained to you the role of Christianity, the role of colonialism, imperialism, Western science, capitalism, how they've all come together and aggravated the inequalities and contributed to this climate injustice. Unfortunately, the people that have to bear, or the people who are being asked to bear the actions, the wrongful actions of the Europeans and Americans, are the rest of the people throughout the world. This is a map to show you the per capita income in 2019. Right, those black color, dark green or green color, those are the rich countries. You can see North America, Canada, Australia, Europe. Those which are brownish red, like in Africa, those are the poor countries. You can see from this map alone, that the world is full of poor people. The world has got only a few rich people, and these filthy rich people, they are hypocrites. They are the biggest hypocrites that you can find. I've said this earlier about the role of those powerful forces. I won't repeat this. So what about things like COP26? It's nonsense. It's a hypocrisy, because they went to talk about climate change. They criticize countries like China or whatever else, right? And then these people, Jeff Bezos, going around the world, Prince Charles going around the world, Bill Gates going around the world as if they are climate change crusaders. What do? They fly their private jets to attend this climate change conference. Why do they have? I mean, yeah, you're filthy rich, you can afford your private jets, we know that. But you're going to a climate change conference and you are taking a mode of transport that contributes to worsening climate change. Can't you take an economy class flight? Or Boris Johnson, you're in UK, Glasgow and London, can't you take a train? After he got blasted, subsequently, the next trip, you took a train. The first trip, you took a jet. Prince Charles flew back from Europe to attend. You know, Prince Charles is portrayed by BBC as the prince of climate change and all the bullshit. He didn't fly a commercial seat. He took a private jet. What is all this hypocrisy? And here you talk about climate change and all the poor suffering. And here you are contributing to climate change. You know, one private jet, these 400 private jets contribute so much to climate change, maybe equivalent to one township in Africa in a whole year. This, I love this one, they call it hypocrite airways, right? Jeff Bezos, 48 million pounds Gulfstream jet, led a parade of 400 private jets, including the Prince Albert of Monaco. Scores of royalty, including Prince Charles. Scores, dozens of green CEO, like Bank of America. And then creating huge traffic jams where they have to force empty planes to fly 30 miles to go and park their planes. So how are you going to have climate warming tackled efficiently when you have this hypocrisy right in front of you? Next. This is to show you Prince Charles and Jeff Bezos. I don't know. I mean, I can imagine the anger. There were a lot of protesters in Glasgow. I can imagine the anger of these protesters. The worst is this. Joe Biden, wow, the person who tells you, hey, decarbonize this, decarbonize that, decarbonize everything. And then his motorcade, this is on his way to the conference in Glasgow. His motorcade drive in front of the, can you see the wind turbine at the back or not? Those wind turbines are supposed to help in global warming, right? But what does his motorcade do? He came to Glasgow from Italy, Rome. His motorcade had 85 vehicles. 85 for one president who, that 85, not counting the helicopters that he had, not counting 2 presidential planes. His Air Force One, he has got one real Air Force One and he's got one decoy Air Force One, because the decoy is to make sure that people don't send the missile to the real Air Force One. So why that whole fleet contributed so much to climate change, and you went to Rome to talk to the Pope about climate change? You went from Rome to Glasgow to talk about climate change? Come on, Joe Biden, decarbonize yourself. You should be the one to decarbonize yourself first. That is climate justice. So, how to solve climate change? Now, you all said earlier in your poll, right? Throw away don't use printed book, use digital book. 64% says use digital book can help environment. Nonsense. It's the other way around. All of you, you use, let me see the result. Huh? Okay, I got it. 10% use 1 hour per day. 25% 2 hours of smartphone, 22% 3 hours, 44% use 4 hours. Do you know that if you use smartphone 1 hour per day, every day, right? The carbon emission of that usage, I'm not talking about producing the smartphone, I'm just talking about the usage. I'm not talking about the disposal. I'm just talking about using that 1 hour every day is equivalent to the carbon emission of flying between Scotland and Germany, return flight twice a year. So those of you who use 4 hours a day, do you know how much carbon emission you are contributing? And this is only what? Today we have only 200 plus people. Already this afternoon, the climate has been affected. Can you imagine? We got billions of smartphone users in the world. Okay, let me quickly share with you why printed book is 1,000 times more environmentally friendly than digital book. We always think of the information technology, computer technology as our climate savior, right? Because they always say that they can replace our physical activities with lower carbon or digital alternative or virtual alternative. Now, this ICT is a critical part of modern science, modern Western science and technology. And this is the one reason why I am not optimistic. All right, let's take a look. Next. This is a professor from McMaster from Canada. Right, he did this research looking at the contribution of computers, laptops, smartphones, tablets, and so on, and data centers and communication networks. They found that the total contribution of ICT to the global footprint will grow from 1% in 2007 to 14% by 2040. 14% is more than half the contribution of the entire global transportation sector, which means cars, railway, aeroplanes, everything. And these are your laptops, your smartphones, and your, for example, your tablets. This was done, I think, 2-3 years ago. By now, I think the 14% will be reached earlier than 2040. Next. Out of the many ICT devices, the biggest contributor to this carbon emission is smartphones. The contribution of smartphones will rise from 4% in 2010 to 11% by 2020. And it will be more than the contribution of laptops and the computer monitors. Another guilty reason why smartphones is bad, because of the phone plans that you have. They encourage you to get new smartphones every few years. And this will accelerate the rate at which older models become obsolete and lead to unnecessary waste, extraordinary level of waste. If you look at the photo, what do you do with all the smartphones? That, I mean, for all practical purposes, they are all still usable, right? They are all still can be used for practical purposes. But because of the phone plans, because Apple kept telling you Apple 14 is better than 13, 13 is better than 12. So every 1 or 2 years, you become an Apple idiot and change your Apple phone. Thanks. 85 to 95% of this global footprint will not be caused by the use of the device, but by its production, which includes the energy for manufacturing, the energy for mining the minerals. And not just that, the professor hasn't give you a complete list. It's a lot more than that, right? And he looks at the combined footprint of data centers and the communication network. That means the infrastructure part. They will grow from 215 million tons in 2007 to 764. So that is a growth of almost 4 times in 13 years, with data centers accounting for 2/3 of the contribution. So he compared the total carbon footprint of Canada, right, in 2016 is actually a bit less than the carbon footprint from data centers and communications network. That's how bad smartphones are. And in this case, the infrastructure. Every time when you do a search in your smartphone and use it and all that, when you read a book, for example, a digital book, it's not there, it's not virtual, it's not as if you are creating the content out of nothing, out of vacuum. No, the data has got to be stored in a data center. The data has got to be communicated over, I don't know how many thousands of miles. And then to produce a smartphone. Okay, I'm jumping ahead. I want to let you know that for every text message, video download that you have, email, chatting, whatever it is, you must have a 24/7 server in some data centers that is there available for you to make it happen. 24/7, that means no stop, no break. And these data centers, these servers are all power hungry, and in their consumption, in their production, power hungry and water hungry. You as a consumer, when you use your smartphone, you do not see all this. When you buy, you don't see the mountain, the minerals that were mined and destroyed. Because you look at the apple, oh, it looks so beautiful. But you forgot all the minerals, all the mountains that were destroyed. Thanks. ICT is highly praised, as I told you, right, to reduce carbon footprints. I agree with this Dr. Lotfi. ICT is doing the opposite. And it's the irony of irony, because it's not the hardware that's driving the...
so many.
It is the software. Because every time they tell you, hey, I got a new operating system, you know, I got a new Windows version, you got to change. Of course, it's maddening because last time when you wanted to underline a text in Windows version, Word version, whatever it is, you press this button. Now they change from the left button to the right button, and they ask you to change your new software, and therefore you have to change your new computers. What does that mean? It means you got to dispose of a product that's still usable and buy a product that you don't really need. Why? Because Microsoft, Google, Apple got to make money. They got to make more and more money, you know, otherwise their share price will collapse. So how do they make more money? Ask you to buy more and more. But the more you buy, the more the planet is destroyed. Talking about it. Your software, your smartphone cannot exist in a vacuum. I was in a Subang Medical Center for checkup, routine checkup 2-3 weeks ago. I was waiting for the doctor, was 1.5 hours late. And I look at everyone sitting in the waiting room. Everyone was looking at their freaking smartphone except me, because I was so busybody looking at everybody. They're all looking at their smartphone. What were they doing? Of course, I go and peep into what they're doing. Some doing all kinds of nonsense. Of course, some genuine phone calls, you know. Some watching videos, some doing this. Oh my goodness. In that 1.5 hours, I mean, all they have to do is take a printed book, take a printed story book, take a printed story or a book about economics, right? Printed on paper. That would have saved the weather, that would have saved the environment, that would have saved the climate. Next year, after that, Apple's going to do something else. Same thing for Google. Same thing for all the so-called ICT companies. And these ICT companies, this is IT companies, the Google, the Amazon, all that, they operate some of the largest data centers in the world. And now they have the audacity to come and tell us they want to place these data centers underground in the ocean. Hey, please don't kill the fish that I love to eat. Next. We did a write-up in our iCapital quite some time ago. It's a special research, a special write-up. We call it "Throw Away Your Smartphone." It's actually not very smart. And then we compare the supply chain of using a printed book versus using a digital book and the environmental impact. What I'm showing you now is a supply, not complete, but it's as complete as you can get of a digital book. Now, where are you? You are at the far right, a consumer, an e-book reader, a smartphone user, smartphone reader, a laptop user, whatever it is. Now, before you can buy that from an Apple store, for example, right? You have to go through huge, complicated supply chain. You have to get from maybe your device from Apple, from Lenovo, right? And the data is probably stored in a data center by Amazon. Then before that, you have to get it, before that, Apple and so on, you have to get it from Unisem, Amcor, the OSAT. And this OSAT will get it from Intel, the chip manufacturer. And then the chip manufacturer will get it from TSMC, the wafer manufacturer. TSMC is not the beginning of the supply chain, you know. Before TSMC, there are 3 more stages. You got to get it, the wafer ingot from somebody else, and the wafer ingot got to get it from another layer, and that person has got to get it from the person who supplies silica. That is only for the semiconductor chip. What about all the other things? Your display panel, your battery, right? So we show you the plastic manufacturer. You can get it from LG Chemicals. The component manufacturer for all the parts in your smartphone, you got to get it from Murata. The casing, the screen, you got to get it from Honeywell. And then you got to go back to get all the minerals, all the different types of plastics, the different types of metal, the battery. So the supply chain is long, it's complicated, and it harms the environment that a printed book cannot harm. Next. This is from Intel. Right? It tells you how you make chips, how Intel makes chips, from sand to circuits. And if you go and click on that, they'll tell you, you know, the chips are made from sand. Sand is the second most abundant element on this planet. Wow. So don't worry. It's the second most abundant. A lot for you to dig. Go to Infineon. Right. Same thing. Making of a chip from sand to semiconductor. So they give you the impression, hey, don't worry, buy, because it's made from sand, you know, it's second most available element on Earth. Do you know that Intel and Infineon are lying? Do you know that they are hiding the truth from you? You don't know, because none of you will have done this research. Only a person at Teng would take the trouble. And they are lying. And I tell you why they're lying. The life cycle of a smartphone, the Apple that you use, begins not in Intel, begins not in TSMC. It doesn't begin there, it begins in this place called North Carolina in the United States. Semiconductor chips cannot be made from silica, it cannot be made from river sand, beach sand. It can only be made from a sand which is called high purity quartz. Because the river sand and the beach sand is so impure that you cannot make a chip. So they have to make it from this high purity sand, or called quartz, which is found, basically a lot of it is found in North Carolina, only one place in the world. Very few other places, very few other countries have got this high purity quartz. But even this high purity quartz must be refined and purified before they can even reach the floor of Intel, Infineon. right? So when they tell you, when Infineon, Intel tell you, oh, don't worry, we made from silica, they are giving you a false sense of assurance. 90% of this critical raw material comes from just United States of America. If United States of America wants to play nasty, which they are already the nastiest country in the world, they can just tell China, hey, I don't want to sell you the high purity quartz. You're dead. 90%. America doesn't rely on China for rare earth up to 90%. But the world relies on the United States for 90%. This is one of the mines in North Carolina, right? It's in a town in Appalachian Mountain, about 2,000 feet above sea level. Thanks, this is from their website. Thanks to its unique geological history, the world's purest quartz deposits can be found in this mountainous region. But look at the poor mountain. What is going to happen? You cannot, mankind, with all your Western technology and science, cannot rebuild this mountain, you know. The fact that you dug it up, it's gone forever. When you make a printed book, the one made of old-fashioned paper, you cut down the tree, you can replant the tree, you can do reforestation, right? How are you going to do demineralization? I don't know what that's, no such word, like demineralization or something. Because you cannot create the mine, you cannot create the mountain again. God, if you believe in God, or nature, if you're a Taoist, created the mountain for you, but it's not for you to exploit in such a way that you destroy not only the planet, you destroy the climate. And this is where your smartphone comes from. So every time you buy a new smartphone, think of this poor mountain. And this is only the beginning of a very long, environmentally unfriendly supply chain in making a smartphone. Next. This is just from wafer production alone, because I said the supply chain is very long. Just on wafer production alone, there are 400 chemicals products used in semiconductor. Many of them are carcinogen, sulfuric acid, naphthalene, and so on and so forth. But what is more frightening is that 40% of these chemical products used in manufacturing semiconductors contain substances which got trade secrets. That means you do not know what they are, and you cannot tell what the full environmental impact is. Hello, this is wafer production alone. I talked about just now the quartz, the silica. Thanks. Besides the heavy use of resources, including materials, chemicals, water, another one would be the power consumption in the industry, right? The equipment and machines in semiconductor manufacturing has become more power intensive to deliver better performance for complex resources, such as the ASML lithography machine, right? Which is 10 times more power intensive compared to its previous model. Remember the Western mindset, more is better, right? Typically, fabs may consume as much power in a year as 50,000 households. These are the typical fabs. The larger mega fab will consume more electricity than the auto factories or the oil refinery. So you can see the power usage, the power consumption, and then to use this power, you got to mine them again, right? Renewable sources accounted only for 7% of the total energy usage in semiconductor production. The environmental impact, it could be once the chips are ready, they're used in all kinds of things, in laptop, in data centers, in tire pressure sensors, and so on, right? But whatever it is, they would affect the environment. So I'm talking about smartphone in this case, right? Now, just to share with you how companies hide Tesla, which is supposed to be the green company, the electric vehicle, the US Institute of Public and Environmental Affairs sort of conducted research into the companies that were Tesla suppliers, such as lithium battery and so on and so forth, and found that 14 subsidiaries of them were breaching environmental laws. Next. These electric vehicles. I'm just sharing with you generally semiconductor production. So you use a lot of copper, tin, nickel, not counting other rare earth and lithium. A computer, manufacturing a computer and a screen take at least 240 kg of fossil fuels, 20 kg of chemicals, 1,500 liters of water. And the trouble doesn't end there. There's always the thing about what happens after you throw it away. You throw it away in landfills, you throw it in incinerator. What is the e-waste? What do you do with the e-waste? And that e-waste, hardly anybody talks about it. I think the message is there, just to show you that the supply chain is complex and very environmentally unfriendly. Next. Summary, production, use electricity. These are some of the impact, the environmental pressure, the pollutant emission, all discharge. The metals, you deplete resources which you cannot replace anymore. You've got to use ultra pure water, which has got to use a lot of chemicals, right? And electricity consumption. Now, if you talk about when they're making the wafer ingots and all that, in the ingot production stage, the furnace used, they heat up to 1,600 degrees Celsius. When you make paper, the furnace that you, the boiler that you heat up is only up to 150 degrees Celsius. So can you imagine the furnace, the temperature needed in semiconductor production is 10 times that of producing paper. Then you got ultra pure liquid chemicals, then you got to use the organic chemical, you got the gases, blah, 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 blah. And not counting, you know, in a clean room, you got to wear all kinds of dresses, you got to wear all kinds of socks. Those are all made of plastics, PVC. Where are you going to dispose them? It's one-time use.
Well, yeah, I saw you inside the video. I saw you quite sleepy although. Yeah, like,
now, this is a smartphone. Just to give you some idea, the case component uses ABS or metals such as aluminium, iron, magnesium. Then the processor component uses copper, tin, gold, and rare earth like yttrium and some other uncommon element. Then the screen uses aluminium, sodium, potassium. Then the battery uses lithium, right? And combined with cobalt, iron, copper. Without the rare earth, you cannot have a smartphone. The smartphone needs the rare earth to give you the smart feature. Next.
They want to apply unit, yeah. You haven't picked unit.
I already mentioned the minerals used: gold, tin, iron, aluminium, copper, right? And they are all necessary. But the trouble is, every time you extract this mineral, you cannot replace them anymore. Every time you dig up iron, you cannot replace the big hole. For all the minerals, it's the same. Next. Then what about tailings? These are when you do the mining of this product, then they create tailings, right? When you extract metals from the earth. And these are stored in big, big structures, which are huge, right? But sometimes, many times, disasters occur. The last one was, a huge one was in Brazil, where the spillage was so large and there was so much waste that local villagers, 19 people were killed. And what is more important is this wastage traveled 650 kilometers along the river until it reached Atlantic Ocean 17 days later. So in other words, the toxic waste entered the ocean. So you entered food chain cycle. Next. This is what the spillage is. And you can see the contamination. The river was badly affected. Then parts of Atlantic Ocean was also affected. So like I said, to make your smartphone smart, you need rare earth elements. Otherwise, your smartphone cannot be smart. And to extract rare earth is very dirty and very difficult. And you use a lot of acids, highly toxic waste. And I showed earlier that the temperatures in these materials that you have to refine, you have to use temperature as high as 1,600 degrees, using a lot of energy, using a lot of water to turn your components into batteries, wires, logic boards, and motors. The same thing, like I showed you earlier, that to use your mobile phone for just 1 hour a day in 1 year produces more carbon emission than 2 round trips between, oh, this is London and Glasgow. This was not London and Europe. This is just between London and Glasgow, which is a short trip. London and Glasgow is like Singapore to Penang. So if you fly from Singapore to Penang to and fro twice a year, that carbon emission is less than you using your phone 1 hour a day every day. So multiply that by the billions of smartphones and the iPhones, and then you get a figure that scares you. And you have a sense of the massive carbon footprint of using these devices, manufacturing these devices, and throwing away these devices. The devices is going to grow, it's not going to stop. And then after that, you're going to have 5G, after that, you're going to have 6G, it's going to continue. So like I told you, modern economy, modern capitalism is adding more, using more, buying more, throwing away more. Thanks. The trouble is this, they did this survey. Half of the US teenagers say their social life would end or would be worsened without their mobile phones. 57% of US teenagers credit their handphones with improving their lives. Right? Second only to the way they dress, their clothes. The US teenager says that a person's smartphone tells the most about their social status, about their popularity, even more important than jewelry, watches, and shoes, and so on. So how to solve climate change? Because you're going to buy more and more smartphones. Thanks. These are additional reasons. Your printed circuit board has got toxic materials. Your liquid crystal display has got mercury. Your battery has got nickel and cadmium. Your plastic has got all kinds of toxic materials. Next. Smartphones, according to EPA, US EPA, smartphone has got a very short lifespan, about 1.5 to 2.5 years, compared with 3 to 4 years for computers. And 130 over million mobile phones retire in the US every year. They like to use the word retire. I don't know what retire means, right? And 65,000 tons of electronic garbage are created by smartphones. It is only in US per year. On the other hand, this is paper. I should have compared the two supply chains for you. This paper supply chain is very short, very simple, very straightforward. You chop down the tree from the forest, you send it to the pulp mill to make it into pulp. And then you send it to the paper mill to make it into paper. That's it. After that, you send it to a paper merchant that's got hardly any, it's almost carbon neutral, right? The paper merchant will sell it to a printer, which could be any printer, right? Which uses ink, some kind of chemicals. On the publisher side, you have the author. It goes to Penguin or Oxford University Press or Pelangi. That has got, I mean, other than the office using aircon and so on and so forth, hardly any carbon emission impact. Then you go to a physical bookshop. Then you as a consumer, you buy the book. That's it. That's the end of the supply chain. But more importantly is it's not just that in the usage. For example, when I read a book, I don't have to consume the data that is stored in a data center. I don't have to use all the telco networks and all the infrastructure. The book is already published. I can share it with anybody. I can share it. If the book is in the library, I can share it with 1 million people. Next. The first paper making process was made in China, right? And of course, many researchers have said that paper is the most important invention in human history, or the invention that changed the world, which I totally agree. And if you look at it from an environmental impact, it still has a very important role to play. As I said, you will start making paper from the forest, whether the forests are responsibly managed or otherwise. Some are, some are not. So if you are responsibly managed, then you do reforestation. If they are not, then you can fine them, penalize them, or whatever it is. But more and more, I will show next. More and more are making sure that they are operating on a sustainable basis. The history of deforestation, this is only in Canada and US, can be divided into 3 main periods. The first period started from the arrival of the first European conquerors until the first quarter of the 18th century. This was characterized by subsistence farming, right? And then in period number 2, there were more intensive and more specialized agriculture from the late 19th century, from the 19th century to the early 20th century, which also saw the beginning of logging for timber as the major industry. Now, in each period, deforestation was the result of forests removed for agriculture settlements rather than logging for timber. Logged land generally reverted to forest once they're abandoned. In other words, if you chop down the trees, leave it alone, nature by itself will start to grow the trees, the vegetation again. Not like in the case of a quartz mine, not like the case of a tin mine or a gold mine. Nature cannot create the mountain again. It cannot, it may take another 5,000 years. So the deforestation coming from paper is not as severe as what is said compared with the deforestation for agriculture and settlement. Settlement means urbanization. What they do now for paper makers is third-party certification to show that you have got responsible forest management. You protect deforestation and you support biodiversity. Biodiversity is an important part of climate change. You must meet this, the landowner and the paper mill must meet this before you can be certified. So there are a few, there are like the FSC and so on and so forth. Once you go, when you buy a book, when you buy a physical book, which you cannot see in the digital, because the digital book doesn't have Apple telling you that, look, that this smartphone, this device that you have bought is environmentally friendly. But when you buy a physical book, you go turn to the back of the book, and if it says, for example, FSC certified, that means that the paper company that supplies the paper guarantees that they will do reforestation. For every tree they chop down, they'll plant the tree again. So there are 2 types. One is forest management, one is the chain of custody. There are 3 types of certification organizers, right? They're all global. So for deforestation, commercial agriculture is the biggest cause of deforestation. And the paper and pulp manufacturing industry requires a lot of water, just like semicon, but 90% of them are recycled, clean, and returned to the environment. They can actually return it to the river where it came from. Unknown to many of you, the clothing business, after the oil business, is the second worst polluter in the world. It uses a lot of pesticide, it uses a lot of water, just to produce the cotton for your t-shirt or for your pair of jeans. So I'm sidetracking a bit. When you are going shopping, I mean, look, this is capitalism. If you don't buy more t-shirts, don't buy more jeans, then how can Padidi make more money, right? But actually you shouldn't from an environmental point of view. So there's a clash between the modern economic system and what planet Earth wants you to do. In US, Japan, and Europe, average person uses about 200 to 250 kilos of paper every year. In India, it's only 5 kilos. And in some countries, less than 1 kilo. So if everyone uses 200 kilos of paper per year, which is the same level as US, Japan, and Europe, there'll be no trees left on this planet. So this is where the rich countries are consuming too much. They should cut down on their consumption, whether it's smartphone, whether it's printed book, whether it's paper, so that the rest of the world, the 6 billion people in the world, can have a bit of the consumption that you, less than 1 billion people, are enjoying. The saving grace for the paper industry and for printed books is recycling and reforestation. Paper and paper boxes can be recycled up to 7 times. After that, the fiber will be destroyed. You can't really use it. Each ton of paper that you recycle can avoid the use of 17 trees, 1,000 over liters of oil, 2.3 meters of landfill. You will save 4,000 kilowatts of energy, and you will save 26,000 liters of water. So unlike plastic, which your smartphone is plastic, paper is very simple to recycle. Whereas in the case of your smartphone, which has got metal, plastics, glass, it is extremely, extremely hard to recycle, right? And paper, unlike plastic, is biodegradable. Now, you may argue that reforestation is not as good as the natural forest because you need to preserve the biodiversity. But compared with mining iron ore, copper, and gold, I guess reforestation is better than not being able to build your mountain again. So mining all the minerals to make your semiconductor chips, to make your smartphone, deplete the resources forever, permanently. So to make a long complex story short and simple, it is not environmentally cool. It is not climate friendly to use a smartphone or keep changing it every 2 to 3 years. Using the old-fashioned printed book is far better than using a smartphone. I myself, the books that I bought when I was in Sussex University in 1974 and 77 are all still in excellent condition. I mean, they have not torn, they are as good as, almost as new, right? Had smartphones been around in the 1970s or 60s, can you imagine what will happen to your smartphone 46 years later? You will probably have changed 14 models of smartphones. But this book that I bought in 1974, I can still use it. A book in a library can be used by millions of people over decades and centuries. A digital book must be stored in energy and water-intensive data centers and all the infrastructure. And so far, there's no digital library. Next. I show you this library, this university in Portugal is about 800 years old. And inside the library, they have got books which are written as far back as 500-600 years ago. These are books on medicine, geography, and all that. Can you imagine a smartphone lasting 500 years? Cannot. The smartphone probably should be intact, you know. But by then, you would have Apple phone, right? iPhone version 1001. Because the one that you have was 500 years ago, it will be version 1. So you will be about 1,000, 2,000 versions behind. How are you going to use that? So think carefully, think deeply. I hope with some of these facts and figures that I show you, the results will change. next time when we do a poll, that environmentally it is more friendly to use a printed book than to use a smartphone to read your book. Next. This is where people may talk about alternate energy, solar and wind. I have been talking a long time. Let me just quickly go through this, because while these are possible solutions, solar and wind, every single one of them has got new problems created. New technological problems, new commercial problems, which will require more production, more consumption to solve the problems. So you're in a never-ending circle of destroying the environment. Thanks. Thanks. This is wind turbine, because you have to make the wind turbine to be more and more economical. So the wind turbine has gotten larger and larger. I've shown you here some of the comparative figures, right? The offshore wind turbine can be as high as 900 feet tall. 900 feet tall is taller than your twin towers. Our KLCC twin towers is almost as tall as the Eiffel Tower in Paris. Can you imagine offshore how it would look like? And then onshore, the tallest in US is about 574 feet. 574 feet is about 55 to 60 story tall, which is about 2/3 the height of Twin Tower. And you cannot just have one wind turbine. You got to have thousands, tens of thousands of wind turbines across your landscape. And it is not just the visual pollution, it is also other pollution, other impact that comes from using wind and solar energy. Thanks. Okay, this is interesting because it shows you how much offshore wind turbines are required to power major cities in the world. If you don't use anything else, right, but just to use wind energy. In the case of Seoul in South Korea, they need to build enough offshore wind turbines. They need 3,644. So you require an area of 3,750,000 square kilometers. And that would be equivalent to 6 times the size of Seoul. My goodness, that is just for the energy for Seoul, just one city. So can you imagine how many wind turbines you're going to have? Next. And of course, solar and wind, you know that they have this uncertainty where the supply is not there all the time, it's not reliable, right? And therefore you have to have backup, you have to alternate energy supply to make sure that when the wind dies down, you still have energy, or when the sun goes down, you still have energy. Next. So my summary is that buying more and more is not going to help. Building more and more is not going to help. Disposing more and more is not going to help. The philosophy is the problem, because we have a philosophy that asks us to keep on adding more and more instead of telling you be happy with what you have or maintaining the status quo. Thanks. Next. Western science and technology will never solve it. What will solve climate change problem? I think we are running a bit out of time. Okay, since we are here, just to show you, this Indonesian company is the second largest pulp and paper producer. It's called April. Asia Pacific Resources is a private company. It's got, based on the Western NGOs, it's got a very lousy reputation that they think that it doesn't do proper biodiversity protection, it doesn't take care of deforestation, blah, blah, blah. So if you compare with Apple or Microsoft, they sound as if they are so champions of climate change, environmental champions, and then this Indonesian company is like environmental destroyer. Let's take a look at what they have done. Next. Okay, sorry. So the 2013, together with the Indonesian government, they launched this project, the ARIA, the Restorasi Ecosystem Riau. They are basically in the Riau Peninsula, just opposite Singapore, to restore the biodiversity and the peat forests on where they are located. So even a lousily branded company, which is branded by the Western companies, the Western media, is able to do this kind of restoration. But the so-called very nicely branded, environmentally friendly Apple, Microsoft cannot do this because the solutions that they take will create new problems. Data centers, Amazon is going to put underground the sea. I hope they don't do that because it will not be just Amazon that's going to build data centers underground in the in the ocean. There'll be a lot of other people who are going to do it. Already the ocean is filled with plastic waste, microplastic, big plastics. And already the acidification of ocean has increased 30% in the last few decades. But here you are able to restore, even for a lousily branded environmental company from Indonesia, is able to restore. Whether they have succeeded 100% or not, it's hard to say because I haven't been there physically, right? But they can do something about it. But what can Microsoft do except for Bill Gates to fly around the world in his private jet and keep telling, protect climate. But he's forgotten his private yacht and his private jet contribute so much to climate change. And his solution will worsen climate change. This is the same thing about the project. Next. So how to solve climate change? No more technology, please. Change the mindset. Change your thinking. Change your philosophy. Taoism. Go back to Taoism. Go back to 2,500 years ago when Lao Tzu wrote Tao Te Ching, the main book of Taoism. Now, I use Taoism also to compare and contrast with Christianity because both philosophies have different approaches and different consequences. There are four main Taoist principles that guide the relationship between humanity and nature. First is follow the earth, the basic classic of Taoism. Humanity follows the earth follows heaven, heaven follows Tao, and Tao follows what is natural. What it means is that humanity must attach great importance to earth and obey its natural movement, right? That's what it is basically, that you must not react against nature, let nature be itself. Harmony with nature, the yin and yang, you're so familiar with, the opposites. And here, these forces are in constant struggle. But when they reach a harmonious state, the energy of life is created. So the harmony with nature, the balance with nature is crucial. Otherwise, either you destroy nature or humankind is destroyed. It's the same thing here. Next. The third principle, too much success. Everything, nature has got its own limits. If you go beyond the limits, of course, there will be this negative feedback. So don't have this insatiable human desire that will lead you to overexploit natural resources. Why did Portugal, Spain, Britain, France conquer so many countries? Because they needed the natural resources, they needed more land. Because why? They have industrial revolution, they need to support the industrial revolution. So therefore, it led to overexploitation. On the other hand, On the other hand, Taoism tells you, look, don't be so greedy. Don't be always thinking of the greatest profit, the greatest interest that you can gain. Restrain yourself. And remember that to be too successful is to be on the path of defeating nature, which means destroying the climate. Affluence in biodiversity. Taoism judges affluence by the number of species that the community has. If the community has a decline in the number of species, plants, animals, human beings, that is wrong. So this emphasis on biodiversity is important because biodiversity is a major part of making sure climate change is taken care of. I don't have time to talk about biodiversity, but you can take my word for it, it is a critical part. Tuchangyan irrigation system is the best illustration of Taoist approach versus Christianity. This is in Sichuan. This is an irrigation system that was built in 2,300 years ago. It's one of the earliest irrigation system in China, diverting waters from the Mingjiang River to the western Sichuan plain. It is still in use today, even though it's 2,000 years plus, providing irrigation, flood control, and supplying water to an area which is 7 times the size of Singapore, 7 times the total size of Singapore. What is so special? Because when they built Tuchangyan irrigation system, they applied the Taoist principle of respecting nature. So what they did is, instead of going against the natural currents, right, they make use of the natural topography, the hydrological features of that area, and work with them. So instead of having to build a dam, you look at this flood control, you look at this irrigation system, there's not a single dam there. And you know, in a dam, you have sediment, you change, you create a big body of water behind the dam, you affect the local environment and so on and so forth. So Tuchangyan has none of this. It doesn't damage the environment. And it's been in use for 2,300, almost 2,400 years, built based on Taoist principles of working with nature, respecting nature. If you have opportunity, please visit Tuchangyan. It's a beautiful place. The town itself is beautiful. You can sit by this wonderful river and have nice tea in the afternoon, or you can climb the mountains, or you can go to the Taoist temple there, and the landscape, the whole area is still magnificently preserved, all based on Taoist principles. This is a photo to capture because it's big. The huge system is huge. It's very big. This is another diagram. The rivers and all that. So you can see it's different from your typical dam structure. There's no dam, but they have able to achieve the same objectives as the so-called modern Western technologies. So one solution is to go back to Taoism. You see the two diagrams. Is mankind in equilibrium with nature, or is nature serving mankind? Those are the two fundamental difference. This is the fundamental difference between Christianity and Taoism. I mean, I love this because it's so environmentally beautiful. Human follows the earth follows heaven, heavens follow Taoism, Taoism follows nature. And this is one of the spiritual leader in Maoshan. Maoshan is one of the Taoist mountains in China. He's saying that the Western notion is saving the earth, but the Taoist philosophy is harmony with nature. So this priest, or whatever you want to call it, before you can cure the symptoms you must cure the soul. It means the problem lies with human desires. Next. This is from Tao Te Ching. When the world is governed according to Tao, horses are used to work the land. When the world is not governed according to Tao, war horses and weapons are sent to the frontier. There's no greater calamity than lavish desires. There's no greater guilt than discontentment. There's no greater disaster than greed. Those who are contented with contentment always have enough. So please be contented with contentment. Then you will solve the climate change problem. You might be able to control it to less than 1.5 degree warming. Otherwise, the other solution is, which for those of you who are still very greedy, who want to make more money and invest more and more, what will happen is space exploration, planetary traveling. The rockets, the spacecraft will go to Mars, pick up all the minerals from there, transport back to Earth. Or maybe they might have robots producing your smartphones in Venus and then bring it back to here. So that could be a partial problem. But I don't think it will, over the long run, meaning over the next 1,000 years, I don't think that will solve the problem. It will just kick the can down the road. It will just postpone the day when you don't only change the climate of the planet, you change the condition of the galaxy, of the universe as well. Because mankind, the greed of mankind is so terrible that it can destroy whatever nature has created. And like I said, that is the reason why, because you can never expect Jeff Bezos to take an economy seat. You can never expect Bill Gates to forego all those luxuries, or those people who have got all their energy intensive, or people like you, 200 people like you, to tell you, hey, don't use 5 hours of handphone a day, or don't use a handphone every day. You can't. So how to solve? Because every time you use that, it creates more demand. The producer, the seller will sell you more, and the whole vicious cycle continues. So my very strong belief is that average climate will go up definitely 1.5 degrees. I think it most likely will go up to 2 degrees, 2.5 degrees. And climate change is something that we have to deal with. Whether we like it or not, how it's going to impact Malaysia, how it's going to impact you, how it's going to affect planet Earth, I don't know. Because science has not gone to a stage where they can predict that. Nature, the workings of nature is beyond the reasoning, the logic of man. With that, I conclude this special presentation on climate change. And if there are any comments or any questions and answer, I'll be more than happy to take.
Thank you, Teng Bu, for the insightful presentation. Let's all give him a round of applause for this wonderful insight. As we come to the conclusion of the presentation, we shall now begin the Q&A session. Allow me to pass the floor back to Teng Bu for the Q&A. Apologies, let's have a 10 minutes break. Grab yourself some refreshment, and we will resume the session at 3:40. See you in a while.
It is slightly different from those AGM that I have attended, right? In a sense, I received a lot of information as well as insightful knowledge on stock exchange. Every AGM will highlight a lot of new things for us to learn.
The managing director actually shared not only the company performance, but also the insightful, the research that have been done by himself and the team.
He explains in great detail management style that make me understand his investment philosophy more. But throughout it all, there's a consistency, like discipline. Like people say, oh, why he didn't go in, the market went up. It's not about the market going up. It's whether the company is at a good price, has good management, has a good service.
It's the 3 I's that they promoted: integrity, independence, and intelligence.
I believe Mr. Tan really have that heart, to really want to make life better for people.
The most important thing is I don't lose money for investors. And you begin to appreciate why Buffett tells you don't lose money. And then don't forget that first rule. We have even given the example of buying a piece of empty land versus buying a shop house. If you want regular income with some appreciation, you buy a shop house with income and then you get capital appreciation. But if you want pure capital appreciation, then you just buy a piece of empty land, like what Selangor Properties did 60 years ago, and allow the value to be unlocked and allow the long-term capital appreciation to materialize. So that is icapital.biz Berhad. That is the vehicle that we launched and promoted in 13 years ago.
icapital.biz meet my investment objective, which is long-term, and I know that my hard-earned money is in the hands of a trusted, experienced fund manager.
The second part is the philosophy that this fund represents.
Value investing, especially Mr. Tan. It's not just about investing, growing your wealth per se, but I learned a lot about life from investing. If you really want an investment which is worry-free and almost you can sleep well at night, this is one investment I normally recommend my friends because I feel that there is no risk.
We give you one simple promise that whatever we do will be done with integrity, and 13 years later, I will still deliver the same thing to you. On that, people believe in us and invested $250 million in icapital.biz Berhad. I'm here today, standing in the Tunku Abdul Rahman Memorial. For those of you who are not familiar with Tunku Abdul Rahman, he was the first Prime Minister of Malaysia. I was born in those generations where we live in a country where civil liberties pretty much more or less guaranteed. And you have a Prime Minister at that time who, well,
Welcome back, participants. We shall now begin the Q&A session. Allow me to pass the floor to Teng for the Q&A.
Okay, can we have the first question? This is not. Should we have the next one? Mr. Tan Chai talks about learning style teaching. I guess based on what I've said, I totally agree with the concept, the principles of Taoism, except that it is not easy to follow in your daily life. It requires a dramatic overhaul of one's lifestyle. And it cannot be just one person, it's got to be enough people to follow this to have an impact on climate change. And I guess the only thing that we can do is to keep promoting, keep helping people to understand what is causing climate change and what can be done. Li Hui, the questions that, can you please go through the questions? Able to answer the questions? No, they're showing on the screen. So all questions, some questions are very easy to answer, some are very technically complicated and we don't have the time. So we are choosing some of the questions, and also some of the questions are more investment related. Well, sorry, we're looking for the questions. This is a question from Mr. Liu Takwai. It's regarding where it says the CEO of Sendabi in the recent AGM was asked about the impact on its caterpillar business, especially in Australia, because they supply mostly to the mining industries, which are huge carbon emitters. And at least according to Mr. Liu, the CEO replied that due to the fact that thermal coal is still the cheapest material for energy generation, the demand for poorer countries like India will continue to support demand for coal in the next 5 to 10 years, as these poor countries cannot afford more expensive fuel. Asking for my comments. Mr. Liu, I think I chose this question because it has got investment implication, and because it illustrates very clearly the complexity, the issues involved in dealing with climate change. The Sendabi CEO is sort of correct in saying that coal is still the cheapest material for energy generation. So if you look at COP26, which is why countries like India and China cannot guarantee that they're going to stop using coal, because first thing is, for China, a country like China, coal is the most available resource for them. Otherwise, they have to import oil and so on and so forth from other countries. India is also quite a major coal producer. So from multiple points of view, from the climate point of view, from the environment point of view, they have come to the decision that they still have to rely on this. So this is where I earlier shared with you all about climate justice or climate injustice. So how do you ask a country like India, who's poorer than China, how do you ask them to give up coal? Right? What is there? Who is there to help them take care of the financial burden? Now it would be great. In the case of China, financially, China is a lot better off than India. That's why China is embarking on renewable alternate energy on the most aggressive basis. China is building so many nuclear reactors for electricity generation. It's building the most nuclear reactors in the world. But India can't afford to do that. And nuclear energy, in a way, is among the alternate energy, is one of the cleanest, except that you have to deal with the lifetime of uranium for a long, long time. So looking at it from all angles, right? Because Australia has got a lot of the resources, countries like India and China, and very soon, it's not just India and China, very soon countries like Indonesia, Africa, and all that would have the need for materials which may not be environmentally the most friendly, but financially viable. And they need to improve the standards of living of the poor people. So that is why I also bring up the role of cumulative emission. I mean, it's like somebody who has been destroying the climate for the last 300 years. In the process of destroying the climate for 300 years, they became powerful, they became rich, they enjoy high standards of living. And for them to continue that, they're telling the rest of the people who are poor to remain poor. It's an equation that's not going to hold. It's not an equation that's not going to work. So, this is one reason why, unless Jeff Bezos, the Bill Gates, the rich countries, the Japan, the United Kingdom, the US, they're able to come out with, America tries to launch an alternative to the Belt Road Initiative of China. America shouldn't be going down that path. There's no need to. America should launch something that can be the Climate Belt and Road Initiative for the world, where the poor countries of the world would be able to get technology assistance, financial assistance, or even manpower assistance to look for energy sources that are more environmentally friendly. Would that happen? No, because the leaders, particularly in America, I mean, if you look at Trump and you look at people like Biden, I just showed you his motorcade, 85 cars. If America is a lot more peace-loving, you don't need to have an 85 motorcade, for example, right? You can have just maybe a few police cars and that's it. But why do you need to have a defense budget, which is the largest in the world, of about 800 billion US dollars, and emitting carbon dioxide more than Denmark or more than Sweden? So you have a situation where the rich, the powerful, which are unfortunately the Western countries, they refuse to accept the reality of what the world is facing, which is, look, I need to help out the other fellow citizens of the world who are less well off, who suffered from our 300 years of exploitation, our 300 years of colonization. And it's not going to happen. So this Sam Darby CEO is in a way correct from a business point of view, that demand from poorer countries for coal will still continue. That I don't think there's any doubt about that. But then what is Australia going to do? That's where people like Scott Morrison has failed to address the issue. So the reason why I chose this question is because it illustrates the complexity. And what is the solution? It needs a global solution. The global solution is not forthcoming because people cannot agree on what is justice. People cannot agree on who should take more responsibilities, who should have less responsibilities. Question from Lim Siu Hua. Interesting question. I chose this because it's very interesting and it's also very practical. I presume she had a heated argument with her friend recently on playing our part in limiting our damage to our planet Earth through good habits. I was speechless as the reason that as long as you use smartphone, computer, you drive a car, you use aircon, you have no rights to preach. Siu Hua, I mean, I have to agree with him, and I have to agree that I'm also guilty of driving a car, even though I've converted to a hybrid, but the hybrid is not as good as an electric car. I have cut down the use of aircon as much as I can so that I designed the house in such a way that I can just rely on fan instead of air condition. And I have used, for example, my hot water uses solar energy instead of from tenaga. But generally, he is right in a way. As I explained earlier, smartphone is environmentally destructive. If you want to read, use a smartphone to read. Buy a printed book. And as we explained to you earlier, the thing about modern lifestyle, modern technology. So if you are, not just you, if anyone, including myself, if you're still addicted to this sort of things, I don't see the day will come when we can solve this problem. So I guess this friend of yours must be a very passionate climate change person, you know, to say that as long as you use all these things, you have no rights to preach. I guess he will also be saying the same thing to me as well. And I will have to agree that to a large extent, he is right. But the choices are not easy to make because it calls for major overhaul in our lifestyle. But it's good to have this kind of, even though your argument was a heated argument, it's good to have this kind of debates because I hope you're still on friendly terms with your friend, or in fact closer, because it raised a lot of awareness. It allows more people to be more aware of the fundamental issues involved. Okay. This one is about ESG. This is a bit different. ESG is not just about climate change. It's a lot more than just climate change, but it came from Mr. Liu Tak Wai. And how can we adopt value investing to focus more on ESG emphasis? Since this is icapital.biz AGM, the special session for the AGM, we have already got ESG in a sense that what we do is our ESG takes into account things like corrupt practices. For example, we stay away from companies or industries that we know are famous for corruption. For example, construction. So we stay away from those because in Malaysia or in many countries, construction is the gold mine of corruption. So we stay away from them. But to answer your question, Mr. Liu, you asked very difficult question because the issues involved are very complex. To force them, you need a lot of fund managers to do that. And I'm not sure if the other big fund managers in Malaysia are even bothered about climate change. So I think we are very far, we meaning Malaysia, we're very far from a stage where the fund managers can influence the listed companies to change their business model to be more environmentally friendly.
We have come to the end of today's meeting. We would like to take this opportunity to thank you for spending your wonderful Saturday afternoon with us. Looking forward to seeing you in our next event, the Malaysia's Economic and Stock Market Outlook on 4th and 5th December. Bye.